Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dr. Mark Boyer, the Senior Minister of Sanibel Congregational United Church of Christ at our temporary home of Refuge Church in Fort Myers, and I welcome you to this Good Friday commemoration. This day, this time when we will remember the night and the day leading to the crucifixion of Jesus. We will do that through the words of the writer of the Gospel of Luke. Interspersed through the passages that we will share will be times of both silent reflection or music meditation. As each section of Luke's account of that night and day are read, one of the 12 candles, the 6 on this side, the 6 on that side, will be extinguished, representing the desertion of each of the 12 apostles, Jesus' closest followers. After the reading of the 13th and final passage from Luke's Gospel, describing the death of Jesus, we will extinguish the candle in front of the cross. Then, after I offer a brief reflection, we will join together in the singing of Were You There? And at that point, our time will be ended, and we ask that you depart in silence until we gather together again to celebrate Easter on Sunday. I invite you now to join in this morning's opening prayer. Holy One, on this day we once again join Jesus on the final hours of his earthly journey. The way is hard. It is difficult to keep going as the night deepens and morning comes, as the hearts of those who reject the light of your ways grow darker with each passing hour. Help us to keep going as candle after candle is extinguished. Help us to rely on your light to keep guiding the way. Help us to continue proclaiming to the very end the words Jesus gave us to help lead us to that light. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Now the festival of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers of the temple police about how he might betray him to them. They were greatly pleased and agreed to give him money. So he consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray him to them when no crowd was present. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us, that we may eat it." They asked him, "Where do you want us to make preparations for it?" "Listen," he said to them, "when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, already furnished. Make preparations for us there." So they went and found everything as he had told them. and they prepared the Passover meal. When the hour came, he took his place at the table, and the apostles with him. He said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said, take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. Then he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. Simon, Simon, listen, Jesus said. Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And you, when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the cock will not crow this day until you have denied 3 times that you even know me. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When Jesus reached the place, he said to them, pray that you may not come into the time of trial. Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed. Father, he said, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When Jesus got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man? When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, Lord, should we strike with the sword? Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled the fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, this man also was with him. But Peter denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. A little later, someone else, on seeing Peter, said, you are also one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. Then, about an hour later, still another kept insisting, surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are talking about. At that moment, while Peter was still speaking, the cock crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how Jesus had said to him, before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled the fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down, I had just read that. My apologies. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, gathered together, and they brought him to their council. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." Jesus replied, "If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." All of them asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And Jesus said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." Then the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king." Then Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "You say so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and crowds, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." But they were insistent and said, "He stirs up the people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he began, even to this place." When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time. He had heard about Jesus and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned Jesus at some length, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing Jesus. Even Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then they put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate then called together the chief priests the leaders and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people. And here I have examined him in your presence and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither is Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." They all shouted out together, "Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us." Barabbas was a man who had been put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city and also for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A third time Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no grounds for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified. And their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and instead handed Jesus over as they wished. As they led Jesus away, they seized the man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A great number of the people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with Jesus. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, God's chosen one." The soldiers also mocked Jesus, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding Jesus and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, while the sun's light failed. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home, beating their breasts. But all Jesus' acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching all these things. They were not the most dangerous thing on the Mount of Olives that night. Not the most dangerous thing on the Mount of Olives on the night that led to Jesus' crucifixion at the hands of the Roman authorities. The writer of Luke's gospel tells us that as Jesus prays on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem that night, his 12 closest followers, the 12 disciples, struggle to stay awake. Well, 11 of them anyway. The 12th, Judas, is wide awake. Wide awake and leading a crowd to where Jesus is on the Mount of Olives in order to take him into custody. A crowd that we are told is armed with swords and clubs, armed with dangerous weapons. But those swords and clubs are not the most dangerous thing on the Mount of Olives that night. The most dangerous thing on the Mount of Olives that night was a kiss. A kiss. As Judas locates Jesus that night, he approaches and kisses Jesus. A sign in that time and place of deep honor, deep respect, deep allegiance. But as we know, this is not a kiss of honor and respect and allegiance. It is a kiss of betrayal, a kiss of dishonor, disrespect, lack of allegiance, a rejection of allegiance to what Jesus stands for and calls Judas to stand for. Judas kisses Jesus, proclaims his honor and respect and allegiance while at the same time betraying him, dishonoring him, disrespecting him, showing a lack of allegiance to Jesus and the things that Jesus stands for and calls Judas to stand for. What about us? How often do we kiss and betray Jesus at the same time? Proclaim our honor and respect and allegiance to him and the things he stands for and calls us to stand for, while at the very same time betraying those, dishonoring them, disrespecting them, showing a lack of allegiance to them. I know I have done that far too often. Maybe you have too. And what about our culture, our society? How often does our culture and society kiss and betray Jesus in the very same moment? Proclaim its respect and honor and allegiance to the things Jesus stands for and calls it to stand for, while at the very same time betraying, dishonoring, disrespecting, demonstrating a lack of allegiance to those very same things. How often do we as a culture, as a society, kiss and betray Jesus at the same time, claim our love of neighbor, while at the very same time condemning and hating those who are different from us or who differ from us? How often do we as a society, as a culture, kiss and betray Jesus at the very same time, proclaiming our love for children, while at the very same time shrugging our shoulders to the violence that we inflict on them day after day, week after week, year after year? How often do we as a culture and a society kiss and betray Jesus at the very same time, proclaiming our care and concern for the poor and the least in society, those who are powerless? To use the phrase the Bible so frequently uses, widows and orphans, how often do we proclaim our care and concern for them while at the very same time making it so much harder than it needs to be for them to survive, let alone thrive? Is it with a kiss that you betray me? Jesus asks Judas. Another one of those questions that Jesus asks people that we have been looking at throughout Lent this year. Is it with a kiss you betray me? And Judas's answer, of course, is, yeah. Yeah, it is. Is it with a kiss you betray me? Jesus asked Judas on the Mount of Olives that night. And Jesus asks us once again on this Good Friday, what will our answer be? Will we kiss and betray, or kiss and honor? I invite you to join in the singing of Were You There?, at the conclusion of which I ask that you depart in silence.